Welcome to Winning Paths, the Irish Field Archery monthly podcast, where victory is an adventure mapped with humour, guided by wisdom, and fueled by epic tales. Whether you're here to crush goals, sharpen your mindset, or just enjoy a good laugh, you're in the right place. Subscribe now, and let's tackle life's challenges together, with a wink, a grin, and a strategy that's anything but ordinary. Draw your bow, take aim, and let's hit those targets. Our material is original, born from our intellectual labour and countless hours spent researching, writing, and publishing. Each episode reflects our deep experience as writers and journalists, delivering content that's as insightful as it is engaging. Check for more at tfam.ie. Let us now embark on a journey into the fabled annals of Chinese mythology, a place where heroes are more heroic, villains are more villainous, and the weather is always dramatically uncooperative. Enter Hou Yi, the most famous archer in Chinese legend, who once upon a very sunny time had the unenviable task of saving the world from, sunshine. I mean, if you're going to be a legendary hero, you might as well aim for the big targets, right? 9 suns, to be precise, which should tell you something about how much work it takes to make a name for yourself in ancient mythology. But before we dig into the tale of Hou Yi and his celestial duck hunt, let us pause and consider the state of the world at that time. In those days, the earth had a bit of an overpopulation problem. Though not with people, mind you, but with flaming orbs in the sky. You see, there were not 1, not 2, but 10 suns. That's right, 10. Clearly someone upstairs didn't get the memo that moderation is key, especially when it comes to giant fireballs capable of turning your carefully tended crops into crispy, well-done shrivels of regret. Now, these suns, in their defense, were not entirely to blame. They were the sons of the Jade Emperor, the celestial bigwig who ran the universe like a heavenly CEO with a penchant for nepotism. The 10 brothers, like any unruly gaggle of siblings, were supposed to take turns shining in the sky. You know, a nice orderly 1 sun at a time arrangement, which might have worked if they weren't all boys with a genetic predisposition for disobedience and a collective IQ slightly lower than their combined heat index. Instead of the sensible rota, they opted for the far more entertaining plan of all rising together one day, flooding the earth with so much heat that it could only be described as a sort of premature apocalyptic summer. Picture it: the rivers dried up, the fields scorched, and the poor inhabitants of earth running around like a bunch of ants, whose hill had just been prodded by an especially malicious child with a magnifying glass. It was not, as they say, a good look. Enter our hero, Hou Yi. Now, in the grand tradition of mythological heroes, Hou Yi was a man of action. He was not, it seems, the type to sit around and wait for divine intervention, likely because he knew better than to trust the Jade Emperor to fix a problem caused by his own offspring. Hou Yi was an archer of unparalleled skill, the sort of person you'd want on your side in a game of darts if your life depended on it. And as it happened, everyone's lives quite literally did depend on him. So, in what can only be described as the mother of all showdowns, Hou Yi took his bow and arrow. No ordinary weapons, mind you, but celestial instruments of death and justice that would have made Robin Hood throw in the towel out of sheer inadequacy, and prepared to do what no one else had the courage or the foolhardiness to attempt: shoot down the suns. Here's where the story starts to take on that familiar mythological tone. You know the one. It's that mix of grandiosity and absurdity that makes you wonder if the ancient storytellers were perhaps engaging in some early forms of recreational herbalism. Hou Yi, standing on the earth that was quickly turning into a giant skillet, looked up at the sky, aimed his bow, and took a shot. And here's the kicker. He hit his mark. Bang! Down came 1 sun, crashing into the earth with all the fiery fury of a celestial object that had suddenly found itself out of a job. And then he did it again, and again. By the time he had shot down the 9th sun, you can imagine that the last one was probably having second thoughts about the whole "let's all rise together and wreak havoc" plan. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. After each sun fell, it said that the earth shook, the people cheered, and Hou Yi probably had a moment of smug satisfaction. And why not? It's not every day you save the world from burning to a crisp by demonstrating some expert marksmanship. Yet, if you were to ask Hou Yi, he might tell you that the whole thing wasn't quite as glamorous as it sounds. Think about it. Shooting down suns isn't exactly a task you can practice for, and there's always that nagging thought that maybe, just maybe, you might miss one of your shots. Not to mention the logistics. Where do you even aim to hit a sun? The center? The side? Is there a vulnerable spot, like in a video game boss battle? These are the kinds of things that would keep even the bravest hero up at night, staring at his bow and wondering if it's really up to the task. But Hou Yi was nothing if not confident in his abilities, and so he continued, sun after sun, until the sky held just one lonely orb. And here's where the story takes a twist that would make even the most cynical storyteller nod in approval. Because you see, Hou Yi didn't shoot down that last sun. No, he left it there, to give light and warmth to the earth, though presumably with a stern warning to behave itself from now on. And what did Hou Yi get for his troubles? You might think the Jade Emperor would have thrown him a parade, or at least a world's best archer mug. But no, the Jade Emperor was less than pleased that his sons had been turned into fiery corpses. I mean, really, if your kids were incinerating the planet, you might expect a little bit of tough love, but apparently not. Instead, the Jade Emperor, in a fit of celestial pettiness, banished Hou Yi and his wife Chang'e to live as mere mortals on Earth. Now, if this were a Hollywood movie, this would be the part where Hou Yi and Chang'e would go on to have a happily ever after, maybe open a little archery school, and live out their days in peaceful obscurity. But this is mythology, not a rom-com, and so things took a turn for the tragic. Or at least, as tragic as you can get when your story involves shooting down flaming suns with magical arrows. Hou Yi, now stuck in the daily grind of mortal existence, wasn't content to just let things be. He was a hero after all, and heroes don't just fade into the background. So he set off in search of immortality. After all, if you've single-handedly saved the world, why not aim for eternal life as well? And let's be honest, who among us wouldn't be at least a little curious about the possibility of living forever, especially when the alternative is slogging through the same old mundane routine every day until you kick the bucket? As it turns out, the gods, being the fickle beings they are, decided to give Hou Yi a shot at immortality. They gave him a pill, or an elixir, depending on which version of the story you prefer, that would grant him eternal life. But here's the catch. Hou Yi, being a dutiful husband, decided not to take it immediately. He wanted to share it with Chang'e, because if there's one thing better than living forever, it's having someone to live forever with. Unfortunately, this is where things went off the rails. Hou Yi, for reasons that will forever remain a mystery, possibly because the ancient storytellers needed some way to introduce a tragic twist, left the pill or elixir at home while he went out to, I don't know, chop wood or something equally mundane. Chang'e, in a moment of curiosity, found the elixir, and, well, let's just say she didn't wait for him to get back before taking it. The result? Chang'e floated up to the moon, where she remains to this day, presumably gazing wistfully down at the earth and wondering why she didn't wait for her husband to return. Hou Yi, upon finding out, was understandably distraught. I mean, it's not every day your spouse takes a magic pill and ends up as a permanent lunar resident. So, our hero was left on Earth, alone, mortal, and with a pretty good reason to be bitter about how things turned out. But let's not feel too sorry for Hou Yi. After all, he did save the world from incineration, which is more than most of us can claim. And while he may not have achieved immortality, or had the most successful of marriages, he did secure his place in the annals of history, though whether he's remembered more as a hero or as a cautionary tale about the dangers of leaving magical elixirs lying around the house is up for debate. In the end, Hou Yi's story is one of triumph, tragedy, and a healthy dose of cosmic irony. He was a man who did the impossible. He shot down the suns and saved the world, only to be undone by the simplest of human failings. And perhaps that's the real lesson here. No matter how great our achievements, no matter how many suns we shoot down, we're all still subject to the same petty squabbles, misunderstandings, and lapses in judgment that define the human condition. So the next time you find yourself cursing the sun on a particularly hot day, spare a thought for Hou Yi. He took on 10 of them so you wouldn't have to, and all he got for his troubles was a one-way ticket to mortality and a wife on the moon. It's a hard life being a hero, but someone's got to do it. Just be sure to keep your magical elixirs in a safe place, and maybe, just maybe, don't take on more than one sun at a time. Saying that, my dear friends, let us remember Hou Yi not just as the man who shot down the suns, but as a symbol of the eternal struggle against overwhelming odds, the pursuit of greatness, and the inevitable humbling that follows. He reminds us that no matter how high we aim, no matter how many fiery targets we take down, we're all still just a step away from losing it all in a moment of folly. So, aim high, shoot true, and for heaven's sake, Don't leave the elixir on the kitchen counter. Well, now, speaking of aiming high and the occasional folly that follows, let me tell you about another unlikely hero, though this one's journey didn't involve shooting down celestial bodies or dealing with the wrath of the Jade Emperor. No, this tale takes us from the mythical landscapes of ancient China to the equally mythologized, if somewhat more sodden, countryside of Ireland. In the verdant, rain-soaked hamlet of Riverstick, County Cork, where the cows outnumber people and the sea breeze cuts through your soul like a particularly sharp knife, there lived a lass by the name of Saoirse MacEoin, whose name, ironically, means freedom, was known far and wide, or at least within the narrow confines of her local pub, as the most daring surfer to ever paddle out into the frigid, unforgiving waves of the Celtic Sea. She was the sort who would rather take on a wall of water than deal with the mundane business of life on land, where people concerned themselves with things like paying bills, surviving relentless drizzle, and worrying about the steadily rising price of milk. The milk, mind you, which, despite its rise, never quite seemed to taste as sweet as the price suggested. Saoirse was not one to be constrained by trivial matters such as common sense, basic planning, or, heaven forbid, self-preservation. So it came as little surprise to her friends and fellow pub-goers when, one fateful evening, after a few too many pints of Guinness, or maybe more than a few, who's counting, she announced that she was off to China for a surfing championship. Never mind that China wasn't exactly known for its surfing waves, or that Saoirse had only recently learned that China was, in fact, not just a mythical place where all the world's noodles come from. No, Saoirse was a woman of action, or perhaps more accurately, a woman of reaction. If there was a surfboard and a plane ticket involved, she was already halfway out the door, with the surfboard under one arm and the plane ticket crumpled in a pocket, assuming she hadn't left it on the bar after that last pint. The next morning, or what passed for morning in Saoirse's hazy post-Guinness stupor, she woke to the sound of seagulls screeching outside her window. To any other mortal, it might have seemed like a warning from the gods themselves, a clear sign to stay put and reconsider any ill-conceived plans. But Saoirse was made of sterner stuff, or at least stuff that didn't involve a lot of forethought. She packed her bags, though packed might be generous. More accurately, she threw a few things into a duffel and hoped for the best. Off she went, with a battered surfboard strapped to her back and a suitcase filled with little more than a few spare T-shirts, a toothbrush that had seen better days, and enough tea bags to see her through any unforeseen crises. The essentials of life, as it were. The journey itself was a saga, filled with missed connections, lost luggage, and a particularly harrowing encounter with something the airline insisted on calling in-flight cuisine. Saoirse, however, took it all in stride. This was a woman who'd once surfed through a gale because the sea looked a bit lonely, after all. What's a little airline food compared to the briny embrace of death on the high seas? But as she sat on the plane, gazing out the window at the endless clouds below, she couldn't help but wonder what awaited her in China. Perhaps, she mused, the waves there would be different, more exotic, more challenging. Perhaps she'd meet other surfers who, like her, laughed in the face of danger and would think nothing of paddling out into the unknown. When she finally touched down in China, Saoirse quickly realized that her surfing championship was not quite the epic event she had envisioned. No throngs of cheering fans, no gleaming trophy waiting to be won, just a small festival by a river that could generously be described as a trickle. Disappointed but undeterred, Saoirse did what any self-respecting Cork woman would do in such a situation. She found the nearest pub-like establishment, or whatever passed for one in this strange new land, and ordered a drink. When in doubt, drink, was a motto she lived by, and it had yet to steer her wrong. Well, there was that one time she woke up in a sheep pen, but that's another story. It was in that dimly lit tavern, surrounded by a haze of smoke and the babble of voices in a language she barely understood, that Saoirse overheard a group of rather serious-looking individuals discussing something called the International Archery Competition in Macau. Now, Saoirse didn't know much about Macau. Truth be told, she wasn't entirely sure where it was, though she had a vague idea it was somewhere in the general vicinity of where she currently found herself. But she did know one thing. Her surfing dreams were sunk, and she wasn't about to go home without some kind of trophy to show for her troubles, not after what she'd endured to get there. So, with the same logic that had led her to believe China was a surfing hotspot, Saoirse decided that she was going to Macau to compete in this archery thing, whatever that was. After all, how hard could it be? She had a good eye, never mind that it was for waves, not targets, and she'd spent her fair share of time dodging flying objects at the local pub when the lads got into their cups. That was basically the same thing as archery, wasn't it? She had faced death by drowning more times than she could count, and if she could survive that, surely she could survive a little target practice. Off she went to Macau, a place as different from Riverstick as night is from day, with its neon lights, glittering casinos, and more people than she had ever seen in one place. It was a far cry from the windswept shores of County Cork, and Saoirse felt a pang of homesickness, or perhaps that was just the lingering effects of the in-flight cuisine. She quickly learned that archery was not in fact some kind of carnival game where you could win a stuffed panda, but a serious sport with actual rules, equipment, and a history that stretched back thousands of years. But Saoirse was undaunted. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to let a little thing like complete and utter inexperience stop her. She had survived worse after all, like that one time she'd accidentally paddled out into a seal colony and had to fend off a particularly amorous bull seal. On the day of the competition, Saoirse arrived at the arena looking every bit the fish out of water she was. She had borrowed an old bow from a kindly old man who had taken pity on her. Either that, or he was betting against her and wanted to make sure his odds were good, and she was dressed in her usual attire, which was more suited to a day on the beach than an archery range. The other competitors, all of whom had clearly been doing this since they could walk, looked at her with a mixture of pity, amusement, and the kind of contempt reserved for someone who's clearly in the wrong place at the wrong time. As she stood there trying to figure out which end of the arrow went where, the realization began to dawn on Saoirse that she might have bitten off more than she could chew. But if there was one thing Saoirse MacEoin didn't do, it was admit defeat, at least not while she was still upright and breathing. And so, with a deep breath and a muttered prayer to whatever gods might be listening, she knocked her first arrow and drew the string back, way back, as in almost to the point of snapping the bow back. The crowd, which had been watching this unfolding disaster with a mixture of schadenfreude and morbid curiosity, collectively held its breath as Saoirse took aim. And here's where the story takes a turn that no one, not even Saoirse herself, could have predicted. As she released the arrow, it flew straight and true, cutting through the air with all the grace of a bird of prey, and struck the target dead center. The target, it should be noted, was a good deal farther away than Saoirse had intended, but somehow she had managed to hit it nonetheless. There was a moment of stunned silence, followed by a murmur that grew into a roar as Saoirse continued to fire arrow after arrow, each one finding its mark with uncanny accuracy. It was as if the arrows themselves were drawn to the target, as if they were rays of sunlight, seeking out their destination with a determination that matched Saoirse's own. The competitors, who had moments before been snickering at her apparent ineptitude, now looked on in shock as this Irish surfer, who by all rights should have been flailing in a river somewhere, made a mockery of their years of training. The organizers of the competition, seeing this unexpected turn of events, quickly decided that this was no ordinary woman. She was dubbed the Sun-Bearer, for her arrows flew like rays of light, piercing the target with a precision that seemed almost divine. The crowd, ever eager to embrace a new hero, began to cheer her on, and by the end of the day, Saoirse had won the gold medal in the historic archery category, much to the astonishment of everyone involved, including Saoirse herself, who was beginning to wonder if she hadn't accidentally sold her soul to the devil at some point in her travels. But why had this Irish surfer-turned-archer been able to outshoot seasoned competitors? Was it some kind of divine intervention, or just blind luck? The answer, it turns out, might lie in the ancient legends of China. As the story goes, long ago, there was a woman named Feng Meng, a legendary archer who was said to have been trained by the gods themselves. Feng Meng was known for her unparalleled skill with the bow, and her arrows were said to be so swift and true that they could even pierce the sun. She was a warrior of great renown, and her name was whispered with awe and reverence across the land. Of course, Feng Meng's story doesn't have a particularly happy ending. She was betrayed by those she trusted, as so often happens in these ancient tales, and met her end in a rather grisly fashion that involved a great deal of bloodshed, and a few poetic last words that have been lost to time. But that's neither here nor there. Now some might say that Saoirse MacEoin, with her wild hair, fearless spirit, and complete disregard for anything resembling a plan, had somehow channeled the spirit of Feng Meng on that fateful day in Macau. Others might suggest that it was simply a case of beginner's luck on an epic scale, or perhaps the result of some cosmic joke played by a particularly bored deity. But Saoirse herself, when asked how she managed to hit every target with such unerring accuracy, would only shrug and say, "Sure, it was nothing more than a bit of the old Irish luck, wasn't it?" Which of course explained absolutely nothing. After the competition, Saoirse found herself at the centre of attention in a way she never had before. The people of Macau hailed her as a goddess, the sun-bearer, a name that would follow her back to Ireland, where she was greeted as a hero. The folks in her local pub, of course, didn't quite believe the tales at first. After all, who had ever heard of a surfer winning an archery competition in China? But then again, they had known Saoirse all her life, and if anyone was capable of pulling off the impossible, it was her. The more sceptical among them suggested she had found some way to cheat, perhaps bribed the gods with a few pints of the good stuff, but no one could quite figure out how she had managed it. But as with all great tales, Saoirse's story took on a life of its own, growing more outlandish with each retelling. By the time it reached the ears of the local priest, she was no longer just a surfer-turned-archer. She was a mythical figure who had single-handedly saved Macau from some unspecified disaster with her incredible marksmanship. The priest, for his part, began to wonder if he should start including her in his prayers, just in case. After all, it never hurt to have a few more saints in the pantheon, even if they were a bit unorthodox. In the end, Saoirse never did go back to surfing, at least not competitively. She had found a new passion, one that didn't require freezing water, death by hypothermia, or the constant threat of being eaten by a shark. She even took up archery back in Ireland, where she continued to amaze and perplex everyone who saw her shoot. She might not have been able to hit the broadside of a barn with a surfboard, but with a bow in her hands, she was nothing short of miraculous. As for how she managed to win that gold medal in Macau, the mystery remains unsolved. Perhaps it was the spirit of Feng Meng guiding her hand, or perhaps it was just that Saoirse had the kind of confidence that could bend the laws of probability to her will. Or maybe, just maybe, it was a combination of all those pints of Guinness and a stubborn refusal to acknowledge that she was completely out of her depth. Whatever the case, her story became the stuff of legend, a tale told and retold in the pubs of Cork and beyond, with each retelling adding a new layer of embellishment. In the years that followed, Saoirse's legend grew, even as she herself remained as down-to-earth as ever. She continued to live in Riverstick, where she became something of a local celebrity, though she never quite understood what all the fuss was about. To her, she had simply done what she always did, blundered into a situation with little to no preparation, and somehow come out on top. That was the Saoirse MacEoin way, after all, and if people wanted to believe she was some kind of goddess, well, who was she to argue? She had never been one to shy away from a good story, especially if it came with a pint in hand. And so, dear friend, if you ever find yourself in a strange land, facing challenges you never imagined, remember the story of Saoirse MacEoin. You might just find that a little bit of Irish luck, combined with a healthy disregard for the odds, can take you farther than you ever dreamed. And who knows, you might even end up with a gold medal for your troubles. Just be sure to keep a firm grip on that bow, and for heaven's sake, make sure you're aiming at the right target. Because if there's one thing Saoirse's story teaches us, it's that life's a lot like surfing. Sometimes you catch the wave, and sometimes the wave catches you. But with a bit of luck, a bit of skill, and a whole lot of stubbornness, you might just find yourself riding that wave all the way to victory.